Morning, Deirdre.
Good morning, Tom. How are you today?
I'm great. I'm great. Still a little chilly. Snow on the roofs.
A little chilly. Heck, we had an ice storm yesterday here.
Did you
So,
really? Oh my
yes.
gosh.
So,
We
um,
can't talk about the weather because I have the door open. It was 55 degrees last night, 75 during the day. It's tough. It's really tough living in the desert,
it's
Deirdre. It's
it,
really
it's very tough. Yes.
very tough. Yes. So we're talking about the decision support spectrum. So
Correct.
we're getting into these things. I was noting this yesterday when I was putting together the outline for these next few series along with you, that the words we're using are now multisyllabic and difficult to spell. So we have to be a little careful that we don't get overly termed out. Too many terms and terms that are not simple enough. We need to make sure that we're making this as simple as possible.
And that we don't use computer speak because we're talking to business executives who, frankly, look down on computer speak.
I love computer speak, Deirdre.
Simple and direct. That's our
Okay.
language.
All right. We'll stay simple and direct. But unfortunately, we have to call it a decision support spectrum. And it's really because what we're looking at and what we demoed in our prior video was the beginning of using an LLM, a powerful LLM, to function as a decision support spectrum for the very top level leaders of a business, whether you be whatever that is and whatever you want to call yourself. And it doesn't matter what kind of business or organization, that it allows you to take varying inputs that do not have to be sanitized, don't have to be harmonized, don't have to be data warehoused or whatever, don't have to be put into a logistic system of some form to allow you to analyze and analyze the way you and I do as leaders in a business or an organization. And we began that demo. We're going to continue that demo by becoming now moving on to showing the spectrum of decisions that can be built into a process that you use for this. Do you want to take and spend a second on this, Deirdre?
A few points. One is that when we talk about a spectrum, we're really saying that the use of these LLMs is not a yes no decision. It's a you lead the model and you get the model to do what you need that model to do under the circumstances. Your relationship with your model might change from time to time. By relationship, I mean the human machine partnership. Let's be clear here that you may decide under certain circumstances you're going to work in this mode, or then you can go to this mode. But what we're really talking about, Tom, is that the more you understand what these models can do, the more practice you have with them, the more you understand how they can be useful to you in multiple ways across the organization. That's the whole idea behind Spectrum. We're giving you choices here, but all of the choices provide an amplified result for your organization. Back to you.
Yes. So I'm just looking a little bit here, and I see that I have the most intense beady-eyed stare that I usually, it's even more intense than usual. And I just want to say that I've been suffering from what, 2 weeks worth of the worst flu I've had ever. And I am on every drug possible to be able to now pull this off without functioning as appearing to be ill. But I see my eyes are more beady and more intense, and I apologize to that for those that are you that are watching this. But this is a really critical topic, and the one thing that you and I are seeing, Deirdre, is that there's not enough discussed about this. There's a lot of what you and I would cause talk about being casual use of LLMs for not what you and I would say is the real power. And one of the things that we were talking about yesterday that had occurred to me over the weekend that you can either observe other people using this and get a pretty good idea of how it works and pretty good idea of its capabilities. The problem with this is that it is a brand new, incredibly powerful capability. And
Mhm.
those of us that are entrepreneurial built, right, we tend to like to dive deeply into ideas, new ideas, to see how do we get the most out of this and how do we use it the most effectively. So you and I would encourage any leader to dig deeply and actually try to do what you and I are doing, so that you can experience that power. We likened it to natural things like fire, or one could say that electricity is not necessarily natural, although yes, it is, because it starts with lightning and so forth, but in the human body functioning. But uh, these are incredibly powerful capabilities. And it's to understand their reach and what they can do takes deep study. And so sometimes it can be appearing to be tedious and not necessarily overly complicated. And we're trying to do just the opposite. So bear with us as we try to simplify all this into the simplest way. But these capabilities, like the use of AI, that will, we believe, will continue to have monumental change in the workplace, how people are doing things, what they're doing, and the changes to their lives. That in order to be at the forefront of that and not be following it, but even part of the leading process, we think is going to take this level of study and use.
Yes, we've talked several times in these videos about the mind shift needed
Yes.
to deal with organizations and so forth. Another of these mind shifts that has to happen is in how you think about the LLMs. I think we've gotten trained, so to speak, over the past 30 years that this software stuff is a program you download and it's there to do certain things for us. But this is a whole different category of tool. That it's an interactive tool where you, in effect, set the rules. You've pointed this out multiple times, Tom, when you've shown people how you have given instructions to the models to, say, give you confidence levels, to give you alternatives, to do this, that, and the other thing. That's a skill that you need to learn. So many people have gotten in the habit of just downloading something, sitting at the keyboard and messing around and figuring it out. You can't really do that with LLMs. You need some prompting to get into knowing how to work with them, and then you can play around with them. But you need to get over that basic mind shift through work you do, either by reading about it or listening to videos or talking with people about it or having someone else show you how to do this.
I think one of the simplest ways for those who have not tried to interact with it in the more complicated way that you and I are talking about, or complex way, or to be able to reach into and see, is by asking it how you can work together with it on something. And we'll do that here. We'll show you an example of, and you and I, we start out all of our interactions with AI, not all, but most of the things that we're doing like this in this type of work, we do it by discovery. What does it do? What does it know? How does it think? And I saw a really good description of this the other day that I was mentioning to you, where a very strong person in tech that understands the ecosystem said that you get the most when you are a domain expert and you're using the LLM to do the things that are harder for you to do because you don't have quite that much ability, but it does. And it's this point you and I make about its depth and breadth and its reach and its speed and the fact that it'll work 365, 24 hours a day for you. So, what we've done is we've now said we did a simple simulation last time, and we're now going to assume we're having the same company, so we don't have to recreate a company, but take it to the next level. And then we have a really fun simulation set up for the week beyond this one, which will be very interesting. We'll talk about at the end. So with that, Deirdre, would you like me to pull up the charts that we have created to take people through what we're going to do today?
Please do.
Okay. So For those of you that are counting, we're on 72.2b. The B series, the 2 series rather, beyond the actual 72 designation of the type of thing we're talking about, is where we're talking about how you as a leader are preparing for doing something. And this is the case of we have now a situation in the way that we've set this up is we've got the two leaders of an organization, a mid-sized organization, that are struggling with different views of AI. And Deirdre, you want to talk about the struggle of the different views of AI? And so we're getting close to being able to show you how dramatically different those two views are.
Right. We actually have two scenarios running here, and I'll briefly run through them. The scenario we used in our 71 series and now in our 72 series has a board chair and a CEO talking about going to the board of directors with a plan to introduce the AI agents into the company. And back in the 71 series, we saw that to condense it to a phrase, that no one was ready, that a lot of work had to be done at both the board level and among the management team to even prepare the organization to have this conversation. Now, at the beginning of the 72 series, we were back with the same board chair and CEO, and the CEO still wasn't ready.
Hmm.
She made a mistake in how she talked with her management team. And they were talking about doing individual projects within their functions as opposed to really using the capabilities of AI in our AI decision layer, which we've been talking about, Tom. To provide value for the organization. And so the board chair has now gone back and they're doing more work before going to the board. Now,
Yes.
to show you what we mean, last time in 72.2a, we set up a company, a roaster, Peak Roast. There it is, which is a $25 million a year roasting company based in Evergreen, Colorado, which roasts beans, has some cafes, and is now running into a problem. It's been told by the supplier of its beans, based in Ethiopia, that there'll be a delay in shipping the beans from Ethiopia to the roaster. And so the roaster started to work with the LLMs trying to figure out what to do. And the substance of 2A was going through all of the options using Grok. That's the scenario, Tom. Now we're going to pick up with Peak Roast again. And Tom, you're going to lead this again.
Yes, I think the probably the most interesting thing that came out of that situation, Deirdre, was number three here. And you carefully worded this yesterday. You want to take this point?
That when Peak Roast went to the LLM, it asked the question, in my words, should I wait for the delay for the shipment of the beans from Ethiopia? They say there's going to be a 3-month delay here. Or should I maybe look for other sources? That was the narrow decision that was given to the LLM. And then through the course of analysis and looking at some data and doing some research on its own, the model came back and in effect said it is too dangerous. It could be catastrophic for your business. It used the word catastrophe if you accept the delay, because there's no way for you to know now whether the delay will cease at a certain point or whether it will go on. So you need to ensure your supply. So you need to take action to diversify the supply. That is, the point is that when Peak Roast went to the LLM, it went with one request for information, and the model turned it around and said, look, you've got to think about more options here. In fact, you've got to take action here.
This is a critical part, Deirdre, that you and I talk about a lot in decision making and leadership. That one could, and I characterize this as a defensive reaction versus an offensive reaction. And
Yes.
you properly said, well, it's not quite that. It's really that you were taking a minor step when a larger step needed to be taken. And one of the beauties of this was we didn't have anybody in the room in the simulated situation telling us this is what we should do. The recommendation was more about should we accept the delay or not? How do we deal with that? As opposed to we have a bigger problem. What if the delay continues? And actually, Deirdre, you were the one who brought that in as a leader and said, when I look at these situations, I say, how much do we believe that we'll really only have a 3 month delay? What if it ends up being 6 or 9 or 12? And it was only when we introduced that into the decision. So this is the point. You can get incredibly good analysis here, and we did some amazing things, especially number two, where we took a messy group of data that seemed to be not be related at all and figured out how it did relate and how it did interact. And you're getting now the offshoot. I don't know if you can hear it, but I just had a plane fly over here, and you can tell because the door is open, right? I'm sorry about that, but the weather's too nice. But the point is that you can get incredible benefit in these things, but at the same time, it comes back to you have to be the leader.
Correct. And in a way, look, the people who run roasting companies in Evergreen, Colorado are likely not trained CEO types. So they may know how to do certain work. They probably know how to run their type of business, but they may not know how to make these leadership type decisions. And for people like this, the prompting of the model could actually save the business. It was very clear that if the decision did not turn into action, the business would likely fail because there would be no coffee beans for it to roast.
And here's the point that the LLM did not do this,
Right.
right? It was you that flipped that decision. I would argue one of the reasons you were able to is because it helped solve number two, right? Because you didn't get caught up in number two and all the aspects of number two, so it allowed you to have the intellectual freedom. Now, when we say it depends on who you have running the coffee business in Evergreen. It could be like my friend Gail Sharp that went there from Chicago being an ad exec and built this enormous spa, right? That's famous, who's very switched on CEO. It just depends on what your interests are. But if you're most people that run businesses, they're more interested in the actual business itself, and sometimes they aren't thinking some of these decisions. But what this does allow you is it gives you the intellectual freedom because you've solved one of the biggest problems we all have, which is getting good data to make your decisions.
Correct. And what this also shows, Tom, and this is an important point we have to keep making, is the need for the human machine partnership. You know,
Yes.
that what happened in you refer to me as forcing the decision on this. Well, what I was doing was bringing my knowledge of how commodities markets operate, that you can't trust the flow of agricultural goods. So it makes sense for anyone to diversify. So let's feed this option into the model. In other words, I'm providing my knowledge of the marketplace and my judgment in how these things work. And then the model proceeded to actually double down and say, look, you've got to act in this way here.
Yeah. Yeah. So, um, a major takeaway from this was by going through this process, and again, it wasn't a rigid process. It was a very open and easy to execute process. You went from what I would consider a static decision, stay back, protect, versus a forward decision that not only solves your interim problem, but also potentially solves a longer term problem. And then today we're going to demonstrate the spectrum. So we think of these when you're attempting to use an LLM, in this particular case an LLM, as a decision layer. as a support layer in your organization that crosses the boundaries of functions and functions more on the processes you have running and thinks about it in the processes. And you then use data from the processes to help you understand this. The objective is improving decision making. And we think about it as three different categories. There's one on the left-hand side here called agentic actions, and this is where the LLM operates as your agent, and it does something. It observes, it makes a judgment, and it does something. That's what an agent does. It operates on your behalf. On the other end of the spectrum is decision support, where now it's Deirdre having to make a decision, and it's her decision to make, and she won't let anybody else make it because it's that important for the business and it has that many ramifications for the business. And she wants the best information she can get and the best guides that she can get to make that decision based on all the parameters of time and risk and so forth. And then there's the hybrid adaptive, where many of the decisions that occur within an organization have components of each of what we just talked about. And it's that spectrum. And how can this kind of technology help you? Because I would argue that's where the bulk of your um, questionable decisions occur, is in that group called hybrid adaptive. And if this technology, if using this can help you get to that quicker and get to that point quicker and seeing them, it can then hopefully help you in making better hybrid adaptive decisions. And we'll show you what some of those look like today. Any comments, Deirdre, before I go on here?
No, except that remember the human always has the end decision here.
Mhm.
That you will never turn over to one of these LLMs the power to decide, whoops, I'm inserting an agent and, we're doing this without human input. Doesn't
Yeah,
happen.
that's a good lead into this chart. Now, that being said, the human can define a very well-defined situation, low risk and rule-bound actions that it wants the LLM to execute. If the supply gets to this level and there's certain parameters around that supply, price, quality of supplier, timing, so forth, go ahead and just order it and then report back that you did it. But there, as Deirdre said, it independently executes, but human decision on under what conditions. We had a discussion today, Deirdre, about, well, I'll let you say, but it was about a situation where since January, there's been a kind of a park where you can let agentic AI models just play.
You're talking about Maltbook,
Yes.
which is a frenzy right now on the internet, where a bunch of people uploaded their AI agents into what's in effect a Facebook group, so like a Facebook group, and encourage them to interact with certain actions. And there's been a lot of commentary on this, and by and large saying that don't believe that these agents are acting by themselves, that you've got humans behind all of the agents really driving the actions. But apparently, a lot of people felt that they were seeing where this internet could go with the various agents seeming to interact and make decisions and take actions among a group of agents.
Right. So let's talk about this. If we and we'll talk in a great deal more detail in one of our future episodes where we'll summarize all this and talk about the implications for leadership. But the point here is don't let AI models run unled, right? It's your job to lead these. Just like you don't just stand out here and start a fire in the desert. And we have sagebrush out here, and I promise you, we can watch that and it will spread. Right? As dry as it is, it will spread. It's the same thing here. You don't turn these things loose in an open environment and say, have at it. You wouldn't do that with electricity, you wouldn't do that with water, and you certainly wouldn't do it with fire. Same thing here. We need to understand, you can listen to many of the experts in AI, and they'll tell you one of the most dangerous things is that they see coming is the unconstrained, highly capable AI models. You could say the same thing about water. You could say the same thing about fire. You could say the same thing about electricity. The question is, we have learned how to use these things productively. We've done it because you stay in front of it. And this is the whole point here. Stay in front of these things. Don't just let a bunch of flowers grow because it's not flowers, it's fire. Um, Sorry, Deirdre. I just thought we should be really clear about what, and we'll get into more about Moltbook, but
Yeah, we'll talk more about this because this is a very important thing for people to understand. Again, it's not as if you're simply downloading a piece of software and it does its work in the same way, in a good way for the company, that these agents, in effect, are created through your use of the LLM based on the data at the time, the context at the time, and so forth, that you by and large have to monitor the work of these agents to see whether the work they're doing needs to be updated, whether they need new contextual information, whether they need new data, whether they're providing the same results, and so forth. So it's not just an on-off switch. It's a way of accomplishing work, but you, the human, need to lead the use of the AI agents.
and I am probably being very unfair to Moltbook, but I promise that between now and the time we dig deeply on it in a few podcasts from now, I will be better informed and can give a better view of it. It's just my bias is to say, don't just start a fire and observe it,
Right.
unconstrained. Decision support, Deirdre, this is where AI surfaces recommendations and provides the context for human judgment, recommendations, confidence intervals, key assumptions, pros and cons, alternate paths, sensitivity analysis, all these things that these models are really good at doing. By the way, not necessarily the precision, so it won't necessarily be precise on confidence intervals, but it gives you a sense of how it is approaching the problem and apologies, Deirdre, what it sees. But ultimately, in this decision support layer, the human makes the decision. This is the one on the far right, where ultimately it's up to the human.
The human also sets the context. If you remember our five-step model, context is a third step, and this is where the human feeds information into the model to well give the model information that the model can then turn around and create the recommended course, the confidence level, set out the key assumptions, and so forth. Remember, these models work on the data that humans feed to them. So this is, again, why it's so important for the humans to be leading here. The oldest term in computer science, garbage in, garbage out, applies very much here. Is the human doing a good job at supplying the context, which then allows the machine to do its part in making the recommendations, creating the confidence level, and then the human comes in again and makes the final decision about what action to take. Very, very important and useful for the machine to do this work, but it's the human leading again.
Yes. And as we were doing on the chart earlier, the agentic action, the autonomous piece is on the left. On the far right is decision support. And then you have this group called hybrid and adaptive. And what are we talking about there? We're talking about where the model chooses a decision support option, and that it does that based on the spectrum that it sees and it wants to land on. In does it land on something that's more agentic, or does it move over to more where it's just supporting? But in all of this, it operates with a set of guidelines. The stakes, how strategic is it? Does has the human already said these kinds of decisions I make to by myself? And the operational and routine ones lean more towards the agentic. So, but in all, the human makes these decisions. It may be a simple decision. Yes, go ahead and do it. Or let's talk about it in more detail. Let's add more data. Let's do more analysis. Let's collect more information. The
And
idea here is you're trying to run faster and also make better decisions that are more resilient, meaning they have longer term last. They last longer. They're not just momentary decisions that have to change tomorrow necessarily, if they don't absolutely have to. And that's where you're looking for where you would like to see in the 20 to 50% range. And that's where a lot of the modeling that's been done using these layers like this, that is the rough range that people are seeing.
Mhm. Um, and this is where it's very important for people to remember the first step in our five-step process, which is the research step, which is where you pose the problem to the model and allow it to do some work so you can test its breadth, its depth, and its biases. By biases, we mean where it tends to go based on its training. We don't mean some of the insidious biases that may creep in at some time. Where this is so important is that in a drive to make the models easier to use, the programmers have made the models very willing to take on as much work as possible. So again, the human must make the decision, the human must exercise judgment as to whether the model is making the right call, as to whether this is the work of an agent, or whether it's decision support, or whether the human needs to provide more input before it trusts the agent to go ahead and do this work. Again, I'm keep harping on this whole human machine partnership, Tom, because it is so important for people to understand. You don't just push a button, the machine says it can do this, and you say, go ahead and do this. The human is always exercising judgment based on knowledge and experience.
And these are just some ideas on you're trying to match the output to the decision. You want to lead the more strategic and creative side, but let the machine handle the synthesis and scale. Um, it allows you to see better the before and after and have that even part of the decision making. And the most important thing is figure out now that I've done this, what's next? How do I make sure I'm creating a path forward? And the one that you and I are on always is measure the results. I mean, constantly look on how did I achieve at the highest level, not small results. Otherwise, we probably shouldn't be making them, these decisions. They should be made by others. But it's did it improve the overall performance of the company, and how were we able to measure that? So with that, Deirdre, it's time to move to, and I think we're going to use Grok for this simulation,
Correct.
and then we'll move over to Claude for the next simulation.
Correct.
So
Yes.
let me just pull up. Now let me share the screen here. And I believe you should see suggest three queries on the screen.
That's what I see.
Okay, so let me just get this started. Okay, we are filming and ready to
Hmm.
start simulation.
Hmm. I see you're in auto mode here, Tom, which is the basic level. I mentioned this because last time we talked about how we had to get out of auto to a higher level, but clearly the model is working well in auto.
Yes, good catch. If we run into problems, we'll have to move up on the depth of the model. Okay, Gary, I'm going to let you describe this for a second while I go offline and cough.
Okay, very much. You can see that Grok, and this is Grok we're talking about, being very friendly to us. They're live and rolling, energy is high, and they're about to show how the AI Insight Engine intelligently adapts its output mode. That's the mode on the spectrum to the decision at hand. So, quick orientation. We're back with the peak roast, as I said earlier. All of the prior assets and information from film 72-2A apply here. Today, what we're focusing on is demonstrating the three output modes from the spectrum using our definitions. In other words, we're leading this model. And what we're doing here is we've gone through what you can see here that Grok is suggesting how we do our presentation, and we followed these steps. We've shown the mode, we've talked about the spectrum, and now we're giving it the problem. Uh, we're giving it, or we're about to paste one of these problems into the search line so we can demonstrate the next mode. Which one would you like to go with, Tom?
Let's start at the top.
Tom. Okay, flavor
Okay.
complaint.
All right. So layer and more. Okay. Here we go. Okay. Okay.
Yes.
What does this mean to us? Right?
Okay.
Or do you have a different fundamental question?
No, that's a good fundamental question. And reminding everyone what this is about, that the switch from Ethiopian to Brazilian coffee changed the taste of the coffee. We all know that the source of the beans affects the flavor of our coffee. And we were worried that switching from the Ethiopian to Brazilian would drive people away. They no longer liked the flavor of our coffee as much, that there would be churn. So we're ready to ask the program.
And think about the situation. What you and I are talking about, Deirdre, and we're actually um, going to be doing this this week for ourselves, is think about you're sitting there, you have this is a Monday morning, quote, kind of situation. You've got your key leaders together at a conference room, or maybe it's a break table in the break room, and you're having your own coffee and whatever you have for breakfast. And you're just going through some data. And one of the people that has responsibility for the supply, they come in and they say this. And the question Deirdre would ask is, the person who runs the company is, okay, what does it mean?
Correct.
That's actually what you would say. What does it mean?
Correct.
And so this is what we're talking about. Now I hit go here, so it's going to now come in. All right, let's see here. From customer, the post-Brazilian switch is a strong sign. It's a strong positive sign.
Right.
Early wins from the pivot we made last week when we did the decision last week. So takeaways from the data. Do you want to take and handle and deal with this one, Deirdre?
Well, we ended, one of the points we made at the end of the previous video was that there are ways to deal with some of these issues. For example, we talked about messaging surrounding this. Some coffee roasters spend a great deal of time talking about the different flavors of the different, from the beans from the different sources. And I think probably Peak Roast did this. So the flavor complaints are down 40% month over month, which is excellent operational improvement. In other words, we're gaining confidence here that our switch not only kept our supply of beans flowing, but it's also meeting the needs of our customers for their coffee. And people can be very persnickety about their coffee. We're
Yeah.
still getting some good comments on the web, although we're still down a bit from the peak, but momentum, as it says, is in the right direction. Churn has been slowed. And the trade-off here, this is where the model is doing some analysis for us, that the Ethiopian flavor profile was a core differentiator, and Brazilian has a different sense, but this is okay for us to have done. That, as it notes, our revenue was protected short term, but the brand positioning might need to be strengthened. What we mean by this is maybe we haven't done enough messaging. Maybe we haven't done the sort of taste test events or things like that where we can have people become more appreciative of the Brazilian profile of the bean flavor. There's maybe a little work to do here, but it's not as much of a crisis point as it was. This is good to know. And frankly, most companies would say, phew, and just not do anything more here. They're gaining confidence from the information here, although maybe a peak roaster would do some more messaging around this.
All right. So the next point is, what does this mean across the organization? So when it says across the assets, what we've talked about, for those of you that are just looking at this one and haven't seen the other podcasts, when you think about using, excuse me, Deirdre, when you think about using these assets, these tools this way, it helps to think about process rather than function, to think about the delivery process across your organization, from the start to the finish. And what it's talking about here is that synthesis across assets, the way you deliver, the key elements that do deliver this. So the first one is about revenue protection. You've slowed down the churn and you've had loyalty uptick, which is the first thing that we saw happening, which was concerning from last week. And so that's a good sign from the top level point of view of the business. It helps stabilize the cost point, about 15% effective, with gross margins up to 36 now. It's better than the low we hit during the crisis of 34. And then this customer asset, which is something we've talked about for a very, very long time, that's one of your critical assets of your business, is the health of your customer base. And this is the same because we've now started seeing a positive NPS trending, which is good news, even though it's still below where it was before. Um, and we're beginning to see some of the concepts about less bright taste and those sorts of things. So, Deirdre's point about brand is a critical one. And then the broader market context, real time 2026 situation. And now it starts to talk about the market effect that Deirdre was talking about when you talk about commodities and what does this mean to you longer term. And this is where that sometimes those of us who are really operationally driven, we tend to focus on the problem of the day or the problem of the week. And these are where this is now starting to make sure you think about these longer term trends. And that was the point Deirdre was making earlier about those of us that have trained to always ask that question about what does it mean for the long term. We have it kind of in our built into our bones. But when you're what we think is the future, it is the thinker doer, right? Not just the thinker, for the leader. We've contended that for a long time, and we definitely see that is the future of the top level people. They are both thinkers and doers. That this is going to be even more important that you have something that is going to drive you to think about those strategic aspects. And this is something you brought in the last time we did this, Deirdre.
Right. I just want to point out something. You can see the phrase real time 2026. Sometimes some of the models are programmed to have information valid up to, say, 6 months ago or so. It's always good to make sure that you know how up to date all of the information in your model is. And I feel confident now that Grok is out there and that these numbers are talking about what's happening right now in the marketplace, not what was happening last year. Now, what this looks like, now let's think in terms of the decision support spectrum here. It looks as if this is a fairly stable area. Yes, there's some work to be done, but this might be one where maybe now we'll look at more information, but maybe I feel comfortable using an AI agent here to handle the orders, going ahead with the orders of the Brazilian coffee. Until I check in again, remember that you always have to check the context, check the information, make sure that the agent is working on the latest information. But we also know from last time that a number of these pieces of information interact. And I have a sense that this piece of information that's been analyzed here interacts with some others. I'd be interested, Tom, in picking up another snippet of information and seeing what happens
Okay,
with that.
your
Let's
turn.
look at the maintenance system update. That could be
Okay,
interesting.
all right.
Mhm.
Those of you that were not being able to see this, what I said was, can you please tell us what this means to us considering everything so far? And then we posted in that roaster number 2, preventive maintenance is complete. We've had no downtime. Temperature variance now is in plus or minus 3 degrees Fahrenheit, which I don't know what that means to me. I'm not as good enough at this. The alert is cleared. Grinder number 1 showing early vibration spikes, predictive alert, potential issue in 4 to 6 weeks. Now it gave us options. I think we should skip this for now, Deirdre.
I think we skip this for now, but it's interesting to viewers to note that Grok itself knows that there are two different ways to answer this issue. And
Yes,
people have preferences. And this is something you can work with the model on to get your own type of your own preferred form of response. I'll put it that way.
yes, and I would say that this is really useful to think your way through because um, it will help get the answers framed more in the way that you consume them, whether you consume them better in a certain way or not.
Right.
So we skipped that, but it's good to see. Now I have this happen a lot because I am doing other things with the folks that provide this. So this new data snippet is from the customer asset. Did I get the right one?
I think we
No,
scroll down more, Tom.
I
Yes.
have it popped up too far on me.
Yeah, it did. Up a little bit now.
Here we go.
There. Mhm.
Okay,
There. Good
here we
news.
go. The equipment asset snippet. Okay. Um, what it means to us right now, considering everything from both episodes. All right, dear, do you want to go through this?
Well, we know from our snippet that roaster 2 is now working properly. And some people are a little particular about the temperature of their coffee, particularly if they load in things like milk at room temperature and so forth. So having a very steady temperature may be important here, especially in taste tests. But we do have them flagging the emerging warning. Now, we knew about this. Remember what we're asking. We're asking whether the information in this snippet affects our interpretation or the recommendations coming out of the first snippet of information. And we've seen nothing critical yet. Like what this means. The Roaster 2 fix explains the 40% drop in flavor complaints and the rise in NPS. I'm not sure that's right. My judgment tells me that a 3% that a stabilization of a 3-degree variance in temperature, Fahrenheit, is not going to make that much of a difference here. But this is a possible inference from this. But what it is reminding us, and this is a strong reminder, that if we don't fix grinder 1, that we could run into a degenerating situation. So we've got to get out there and fix grinder 1 immediately, or else our good work may go away. So there's
Exactly.
nothing critical here, nothing critical, but it's pointing to that we have to take action here. It's telling us directly, it's giving us a scenario. This time is a very good decision support scenario where we kind of knew about something and it's telling us now. It's giving us the information to prompt us to make the decision to take the action to fix the grinder. A long, complicated sentence there, but this is absolute prompting and saying, don't mess this up. You're on upward momentum, and if you don't fix this, your momentum could decline. So,
Yes. And this market tailwind is an interesting comment.
yes, future soft. This points to the ongoing need to monitor the source of the commodity of coffee beans. There are multiple sources of beans, and the sources are very dependent on weather, on politics, and so forth. Maybe it's a time to start investigating the Kenyan market as
Yes.
well.
All right. So let me go back and grab another piece of data here. So
Right.
what would you like to look at next, Deirdre? Let me just get up here the
Um,
data.
I I think we just passed it, Tom. Scroll down
Yeah,
slightly. Up again. Up again. There. Why don't we take this finance market quick report here and see what that does?
this
That
one here.
last one, the fourth bullet.
Yeah. Now I'm going to write, can we please incorporate what finance is telling us?
Hmm.
And then I'm going to put in this comment,
Right.
and it says that bean costs have stabilized with Brazilian Colombian mix, which is an effective 15% increase versus pre-crisis baseline. The gross margin is recovered to around 36. The target is 39. And the subscriptions are DCC, the direct to consumer subscriptions are plus 3% month over month, which is good news. And for those of us that weren't here the last time, we do have a subscription online purchase and subscription basis. Cafe traffic is flat. And for those, again, not with us, we have cafes throughout the region. Arabica futures have dipped 8% last week, and there's potential future further relief of that future price in Q3. Okay. We ready to figure out what this means?
Ready to figure it out.
Okay, here we go. Okay. So this is talking about, let's see here. Let me stabilize the screen. Okay.
Now it's saying that this is a strong positive update. It shows continued stabilization and recovery, which is good to know. and it goes over some of the information. It notes that the bean costs have stabilized, that the gross margin is recovering, although not quite up to our target rate, that our subscriptions are growing. Now, interestingly, our subscriptions are growing, but our cafe traffic is flat. That might be something to investigate depending on our financial model for the cafes. By that, I mean whether we own them, whether they're franchises, where they're located, and so forth, because we want to keep our franchisees happy. We want to keep our people out in all locations happy. But what's interesting here is how it's treating the Arabica futures dipping. That potential further relief by Q3. Well, by now it should know that we don't believe in potential
Right.
relief in the future, that we need to keep our supply steady. So let's see if it says something about here, a recommendation about ordering. Futures dip, buying window for more Colombian Kenyan stock or spares. Interesting. It's pointing out that for operational efficiency, we've got to get out there and maybe start buying, not just analyzing the buying of, but buying some Colombian or Kenyan stock here. Which is very interesting. Now, one thing it doesn't talk about, it doesn't have this information, is what the flavor of the Colombian Kenyan stock would do. It's still talking about a return to the Ethiopian, which again, this is me as the human with my knowledge and judgment, just saying, okay, I know that, don't have to pay attention to it now. Here.
Yeah, I think the Colombian was nutty and whatever. But the thing I would say is that if we're in the staff meeting, I want to have the other piece of data too, Deirdre, before we
Okay,
start
throw it in.
making a decision, right?
Throw it in. It's
Yeah, so let's go back up here.
customer asset health. I think it is
It's right here.
here. The
I think it's
it's the third one. The
the
HR one
HR.
starts
Yeah.
HR people run.
Okay,
Okay.
let's hear from HR first. And then from there, we've captured all of this. So we've got everybody in the room has weighed in. And we're going to assume um, before we reach any decision points, why don't we incorporate what HR is telling us? Okay.
Okay.
Now, for those of you that are wondering, some of this data came out of our last episode because some of the baseline data came from there and came from the profile of the company we inputted. But we did not, just so you know, we did not input a financial statement. We gave key data that you would know if you're the head of the company or head of the company that you're running just from your performance data and accounting data. So a lot of this stuff is taking and looking at it from what we've already told it, and that's where it's getting this data. It doesn't have access to a big ERP database to help with that sort of thing. It's doing it otherwise. Okay, here we go.
So it just reviews the data that we hired one junior roaster, but we have one senior person exiting, that we've stabilized barista turnover, but we're still short one master level roaster. So synthesizing across all assets and connections. Um, we're talking about talent is the weakest link dragging on full stabilization. In other words, it's saying, okay, you've stabilized. There are things to pay attention to, but the thing that requires your most attention right now is the talent. Here, because as it says down here in the net meaning, the master roaster gap is a high leverage risk. It directly threatens the brand that drove recent improvements. And with peak seasons approaching and market tailwinds, now is the window to invest in talent. In other words, it's pointing to talent as the main thing that could affect the upward trajectory of this company. Now, I don't know whether an executive, someone sitting around this table you posited, Tom, the table of the team, people on the team, would have put a finger on talent as the most important issue without this sort of analysis. People might be thinking because it's a coffee company that maybe beans are the most important, maybe things like turnover and, subscription numbers and so forth. But what this model is suggesting is that all of that is great, but unless you solve your talent issues, you're going to have problems. So keep the other things moving in a positive direction, but work on this one right now.
Yeah, it's again, Deirdre, this is the benefit of this, that there's no reason why any business can't do something like this and simulate this just like we have, is just put everybody together for a few minutes and say, what's top of your mind about the area that you focus on? Tell me. And we put it in and let this tool does what it does so well. And actually, Claude does this well. I'm sure that we're going to find if we did this in Perplexity or we did it in Gemini, we'd probably find similar things, although we're going to talk about that in a minute. But try it to see what you can learn from this, because that same voice, while you're focused so much on supply, for example, because you had what looked like and was a crisis last week, you've gotten through that. And now there's really this underlying master roaster issue, which is there that's could cause you a serious problem. Having that voice in the room to help you keep that in line when your next problem is, okay, I've got customers out there that need to be fulfilled, um,
Mhm.
is a real help.
Think about the whole journey here, Tom. We started in the previous episode with one problem, and that was, should we accept the delay in the Ethiopian supply? And look where the process of prompts and analysis have gotten us. It's given us a plan for stabilizing the problems. It's forced us to make the right decision. It's surfaced other issues for us to take care of, and it's pointing right now to the most critical issue for us. One of those lines in the analysis was talent connects everything else here. It connects the supply, it connects the roasting, it connects the returns, it connects the consumer experience, and so forth. So the talent becomes our most important problem, and we were nowhere ready to even think in that direction back
Not
when
when we
we
started
started
this.
using this tool.
Not when we started this. And so, um, the thing about this is, again, it's not invasive. We don't have to go out and buy a system that's going to get into all of our data and expose our data to the web, or it's not costly, right? The cost is your time and the attention of the people that you have involved in this. And it's easy to do. It just takes you putting people together, however you want to do it, to be able to get what they intuitively know is the most important thing going on in their area. Now, is it the substitutions for a good performance review and a good plan and all that? No, it's not. Is it is it a substitute for good operational effectiveness? No, it's not. But for the top level people that have to make decisions about how this business manipulates through or maneuvers through the marketplace, you've got something here you haven't had before. And so you don't need to go out and buy a big AI implementation to be able to get some huge insights in the way your business is functioning and your ability to, what's really critical for a CEO is their judgment and how they apply their judgment to the key decisions that need to be made to make the business grow effectively.
Mhm.
Do you want to talk about next?
I was about to say first, excellent summary there, Tom, of the ground we've
Thank
covered
you,
for the
Deirdre.
past two exercises. But now, one of the points we keep making, Tom, is that the different models um, work differently. And
Yes.
we'll be coming to that shortly. But here, this is what we call a summary slide here. And what you're seeing here is before the work of the leader before. This is like sort of one of those before photos in the advertising agencies. Before you were siloed, you ran limited scale pilots, your anxiety was high, you could only get certain fixed outputs. That is, you had to define the outputs here. And what we've been showing you and will continue to show you as we demo some different models here going forward, your after photo is a very smiling leader here. You're connected, you're fast, you're proactive, you have better leverage in the organization. Look what we just saw, that the model surfaced issues that we were not focusing on, but that turned out to be the most critical issues for our organization going forward. We gain confidence that we as leaders are making the right decisions and taking the right actions. And that, I mean, Tom, you and I have both been leaders, and we know that having the confidence that you're doing the right thing is such an important step in actually accomplishing what's right for the business. And we've been pointing out, we haven't perhaps done it as much as we could have, that our interactions with the model are giving us different ranges of how to accept the information. I flagged at one point, look, this ordering process, we can make that an agent as long as we continue to monitor and provide the context it needs so the agent stays in target. We've also shown that, look, all of this is prompting us to make a decision. It's not making the decision for us, it's providing the insights and the information so that we can make the right decision about the next step to do. In other words, let's start looking at the talent here. But it's also given us some steps, and we've seen this along as sort of like an agent could do this, or we need more input here, or let's look at this next snippet of information, which may change the recommendations we're making and so forth. The model, and Grok in this sense, does have the ability to understand the possibilities of what comes next, which is your hybrid range. It may feel confident in doing something. It may say, I need to look at that next snippet of information. Or it may say, you go off and do. I've given you the information here. So you have greater strength and support in making the decisions as you lead your organization.
So let's do this against probably your better judgment, Deirdre. Let's go in here and say, this is great. Could you do one more thing for us?
Okay.
Could you please, would you please list the decisions you recommend for the three categories?
Okay. This could be interesting.
And those three categories are um, the agentic, the hybrid, adaptive, and the final one is decision support.
Right. Let's see what it does with this. Interesting.
Okay, let's see. Okay, you want to take this on, Deirdre?
Well, let's go up to the decisions it says we should make here. That's a good starting point. The
Okay.
supply pivot to the Brazilian Colombian mix, interesting. The equipment, our dealing with roaster 2 and grinder 1. Our finance pointing to issues that we have to deal with here. And then some of our talent issues that we're short one master grinder. So let's see what it thinks agents can do. Execute preventive procurement maintenance on grinder 1. Yes, I think that my sense is an agent could schedule that maintenance and make sure the maintenance is done and that grinder 1 is now working well. Auto adjust inventory reorder thresholds. Now that's interesting. That's what I've been talking about how you have to make sure that your AI agents continue to have the data and the context they need to work well. I'm not sure I have the confidence yet to turn that completely over to an AI agent. So I'm making a
Exactly.
commitment here. Implement automated scheduling tweak reinforcement. Could be. I'd want to review what it's talking about, but then maybe that is something that we could turn over to an AI agent if the baristas feel comfortable there. Remember, we're dealing with human beings here, and we don't
Yep.
want human beings to feel that an AI agent here is telling them when to show up at their jobs. So that's an interesting analysis. Now, the hybrid adaptive. Now, this is something. It is saying that all three of these hybrid decisions almost could be agentic here. Or there are two parts. The agents could do part of it, and then humans do part of it.
Right.
The talent retention, auto post job listings. Yeah, we might allow it to do that. We'd want to see what it's listing and where it's listing it. Flag for our review. Finalized offer packages. Well, we want to be there in steps earlier. We want to do the interviewing. Remember, we're a smallish company. So certainly the head of the company wants to interview all of the master roasters and then finalize the offer package, recruiting process, and so forth. Flavor menu bridging. It's saying an agent could launch a limited time bright blend promo. I'd have to think about that. I am not sure I would allow an agent to do that. Remember that again, we're a small company. Maybe if I'm a giant worldwide food processing company, I might allow more agentic action in this area. But given the size of my company, I'd have to think about that. The human decide whether to source test different lots to make decisions about reintroducing the Ethiopian and so forth. Now, to my mind, by the way, I would not still be focused, I as the leader would still not be thinking Ethiopian
Mhm.
yet. The machine has decided to focus on the Ethiopian because it is overstressing the importance it perceives among our customers of the
Mhm.
Ethiopian flavor. But I'm more worried about supply as the leader. So I'm going to
Mhm.
push that aside for the minute. Glad to have the input and information, but I'm not going to pay attention to that for the moment. The working capital. Agentic release 20 to 30,000 for grinder spares. My guess is that I might want to approve a bill, but then make the actual payment, the writing of the check or the sending of
Mhm.
the money agentic. That's a possibility there. It depends on how my processes are set up for payment. That's a process issue. And it's maybe a matter of do I want this for all of our, to be able to release all monies, for example, payments of salaries or uh, grinder parts or rent for the store locations or whatever. I'd have to think that through as a process, but it's possible I might allow an agent to work in that area. The adaptive, allocate additional budget, yeah, that's my decision. I don't want an agent allocating additional budget for talent,
Yes, exactly.
or someone could hack it and give themselves a $50,000 raise. Forget it. Decision support. Now, primary recommendation here. AI surfaces rich recommendations for human judgment here. Very interesting. Primary recommendation, accelerate master roster hiring and the retention of personnel. That I accept. It's given me enough information and enough of the risk and implementation information for me to accept that from it,
Yeah.
I
So
think.
essentially it went through and did the only one that it would say, really, I've got to do a lot of work around because it has aspects to it that are going to warrant just steer to making this decision. And then I'll give you all the rationale,
Right,
the appropriate rationale that you would want.
right.
These hybrid adaptive, I'll tell you the conditions and I'll tell you what I think I should do and what the human can do. Uh, and then the other one is this is stuff you ought to just let me go ahead and do. So what what you really would be fascinating, and I think we should do this, Deirdre, in another video, in a different video. I'd like to take each one of these and say, please tell me how you would do it.
Absolutely. That would be fascinating. Because again, we don't know how it thinks it would execute the
That's
action.
the point. That is exactly the point. You told me a minute ago how you would do it
Right.
when you went through this. I want to hear how it says it would do it. And then we can come back and say, so if we, and I want to take a pause because we've gone an hour and 15 minutes of a lot of fun for you and me, but maybe we've reached the boring point. We could have reached that much earlier, Deirdre, but not for you and me. So let's now just come back and talk about what you and I are going to do next. So let me
Okay.
just grab the our charts here.
Okay.
And we
Next.
did put together for you all in the past, how do you move forward? How would you move forward here? And we've talked about this. It's moving, looking at your organization to an asset point of view, looking at it as a process. And you'll see up here on this side, you'll see you're looking at it as a process. And then you choose an area, look for early wins in that area. But my view on this thing is just this is a case of like you and I just did, dear, to start using it. This is going to be the really fun one. The one that we will do next week will be where we're going to now take all this work that Grok has done and we're going to take it over to Claude and say, Claude, what do you think of this? And if you did it, what would you do? And how would you do it differently? And can you tell us then, through a compare and contrast, what you think about all this?
Mhm.
And as Deirdre and I know, Claude has some opinions.
Claude has opinions. And remember, we've been working on Grok so far. So we'll see what Claude has to say here.
Well, you and I kind of know what Claude says. It
We
was
kind of know,
hilarious, actually.
but we won't give anyone previews now. Come back
No,
next
but it
week.
was, excuse me, it was absolutely hilarious. You were laughing pretty hard this morning.
Right.
Apologies for the periodic congestion here, but we have to continue on.
We
Deirdre,
will
it's
continue on.
always a pleasure.
Always a pleasure, Tom.